Hi, Kevin. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's a joy. It's a joy because I really love the wildness of your poetry.
Thank you.
It's you capture this like it's interesting because with the best material for the artist in the world, it really is a biography and poems. It's a work of nonfiction, historical nonfiction that is like condensed down to the most beautiful poetic language.
Thank you. That's a nice compliment.
You want to start by telling us a little bit about Albert?
Sure. Albert Bierstadt was an immigrant child. His parents moved over to America from Germany when he was 2 years old. This is about 1840. He grew up in New Bedford, Massachusetts, which was a whaling town. And his father was a cooper, which is a barrel maker. And so everything in his young life was about geared toward the whaling industry. But that didn't seem to appeal to him. So he had an artistic flair, and he was drawing things and painting things. And his brothers were interested in photography, which was a brand new sport or activity at that time. So anyway, he ends up going to Europe to apprentice with some masters when he was just about 20, 22 years old, and he stays in Europe 4 years, but he never enrolled in any particular school. He was interested in the Dusseldorf school, but the teacher he had set up with died before he got there. So he just kind of roamed around on his own and is really a self-taught artist. He befriended a number of American artists over there, Emanuel Leutze and Worthington Whitridge and others, but he spent time in Germany and in Italy before he came back to the U.S. I can talk for a long time, so just tell me how much of the story you want to know, or we want to do it in segments. Because the book is kind of arranged in segments about his apprenticeship and then him going
chronologically as well.
Yeah, exactly.
And I don't want to give too much away because there is a narrative structure to it that you don't always see in poetry. Like W.S. Merwin came to mind when I was reading you, because just with the punctuation that you guys use, but there's also like it's a very modern book of poetry, in my opinion, and it kind of bursts out into our current world, which I thought was really cool.
That's deliberate, yes.
What sort of on the ground research did you do for the book?
Wow, that's a good question. I started out with a couple of the big pictorial biographies, the coffee table books. There's one called Art and Enterprise, and there was another one just called Albert Bierstadt, Painter of the American West. And I just went through reading those, gathering incidents from his life, and then learning a whole lot about the peculiar things about his story. It's sort of a rags to riches to rags story. He was immensely famous and wealthy at one point, and then fell out of favor. But that's sort of getting ahead of the thing. I started acquiring other books about Bierstadt. There's several good ones. There's one by Matthew Beigel. There's ended up being several new ones along the way. It took me 12 years to write this, and during the time I was working on it, there were several new books and exhibitions about his work, which were just marvelous. This kind of fell in my lap to go see these. What I discovered, Kevin, was after looking at these pictorial books for a few months of the first year, I realized there's no way I'm really going to get a sense of what his work is like by looking at them in books where the pictures are like 8 by 10. So I started going to museums and to see his work, where most of them are 6 feet by 10 feet or something like that, and sometimes even bigger up close. That really made the experience more powerful to me, and I was able to write even more poems because I was able to see the detail that it doesn't show up in a little square of a book, this size, and then you see one that's the size of a wall. And what was cool for me was that back when I started this, like 10, 12 years ago, all of the really good museum quality, high resolution images weren't available on the web yet. And so I got to make my own in the museums. I just had my little snap and shoot camera, and I would get up in front of a big one like Landers Peak at the Met, and I'd just go snap, 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 snap. And the docents are watching me carefully. I have a poem about that. But I was able to get rich detail that didn't show up in the book prints. Later on, these museums and on Wikipedia and WikiArt and places like that started putting the high resolution images out there. So now you can scan and zoom in and see the things that I was able to see early on. But I went to museums in New York and Washington, flew out to California, went to the Hagen Museum in Stockton to see some work up close. So it really became kind of a relationship with the paintings as much as it was reading and research of documents.
Do you have, what are like maybe your 3 or 4, this is hard because Bierstadt has a ton of paintings, but what are like maybe your 3 to 5 favorite paintings of his?
Oh, wow. Well, there are different stages. He has great scenic paintings that are full of the mountains and the majesty and the Native Americans. And then he has a wonderful, intimate animal portraits as well, and others where there are no figures, human figures involved. And then there's some nice, smaller scale portraits. So, but to answer your question, one of my favorites is the one that's in the Metropolitan Museum. It's Rocky Mountains Landers Peak, which was about his second really famous painting. There is a very small, intimate painting called Surveyor's Wagon in the Rockies. I did an ekphrastic poem on that one that's in the book. It's just a tiny little picture about the size of like 11 by 14 inches, which shows a wagon on the Great Plains and the vastness of the plains behind it. He's got a marvelous one of Yosemite Falls, where he uses the Native American name Choluk. It's Choluk, the Yosemite Falls, and it just shows the power of the falls and his little encampment of his friends and fellow artists at the foot of it. But I guess one of my favorites would be the one that's on the cover of my book, which is another Yosemite painting, yes, called Looking Up the Yosemite Valley. And in the bottom left corner of the cover of the book is an artist sitting there with his easel drawing, painting, and that's Bierstadt. It's one of the very few self-portraits that he has or that he did, and I thought, well, that's just the perfect cover for the book, considering the title also comes from a quote from him from a letter. So those are some of my favorites.
You did a good reveal on the title too, because it was sort of, you waited until like the artist, as an artist, he kind of fully unfolds, and then like all this, the real world kind of fame, and then like the pressure to keep fame and reputation and clout in many ways. With such his life story is so fascinating.
It is. It's a combination of glory and tragedy all together, which makes it, not uniquely, but sometimes typically American.
It's a very American story, right down to the fact that he was a first-generation immigrant.
Yes.
So the best material also pairs 2 of your favorite art forms, which is nature photography and landscape art.
Right.
And I know that those 2 things were pivotal in your journey toward poetry. When did your love for poetry begin?
Interesting question. Those 2 things are almost simultaneous. I went on a 6-week camping trip of the West with my brother way back in, get this, 1971. I was still a teenager.
My man.
And we went all over. We went to Grand Canyon, Bryce, Zion, Sequoia, Kings Canyon, Yosemite, then up to Yellowstone and the Grand Tetons. But when I came back, I was in college, sophomore in college, and I went, just showing everybody photographs of this isn't enough. I need to write about it. So that's when I started writing. I wrote believe it or not, the vastness of Yellowstone, the first things I wrote were haiku, which you try to put it into 17 syllables, which
I
didn't work
love
very
that.
long. But that's when I really got started, was the nature poems about that trip. And then, of course, where I lived and went to school, being in the mountains of western North Carolina, there's lots of opportunity to see and view and the beauty of nature. I mean, the Blue Ridge Parkway, Mount Mitchell, Pisgah Forest, all those became, my backyard.
So one of the many fascinating stories in the book is the story behind base of the Rocky Mountains, Laramie Peak. That was. Do you want to tell that story?
Well, that was his first really famous large-scale painting, done not long after his first trip out west, which was in 1859. And it was shown, publicly, and got a lot of critical acclaim, and one of the ones that helped make him famous. Fast forward, 60 years, 50 years, something like that, he's no longer in favor, and that style of landscape painting has been replaced by a love for Impressionism. And he gave the painting, or loaned the painting, to a high school in Buffalo, New York, and they lost it. That's all I can tell you is they lost it. It disappeared. We don't know where it went. Somewhere in the 1920s, they realized, we don't have this anymore. And right now it would have been one of the most valuable paintings of all of his. It's on the scale of the one that's in the Met, similar subject matter, same size. But I wrote a poem in which I just imagined what might have happened to it, something that was considered in disregard, and had some students taking it out and having fun with it. None of that is true. That's all made up. Thus the title Conjecture for that poem. But it's one of the big losses. The only record they have of it is it shows up in a photograph of one of these mass exhibitions of paintings that occurred. It was very popular in the 1860s and 70s. And you can see it on the edge of the photograph, and they know it by the description of what was in it, but there's no other visual record.
Do people need to become familiar with Albert's art before they read your book?
I don't think so. I think I give an introduction to his work. If you have a sensitivity toward landscape or toward the American West, I believe you can begin it. It certainly would not hurt to be Googling some of his paintings along the way as you were reading it. Not that many paintings are referenced by name in the book, some, but not a lot. But yeah, I would get a feel for what it's like to Google his name, see what's in the Met, see what's in the Brooklyn Museum. Most people that know the name know what kind of art I'm talking about when I mention him. If they've never heard of him, then it doesn't make any difference. But they almost always think, oh yeah, those big Yosemite paintings or those big Yellowstone paintings.
So what led to his sort of reemergence?
Good question. He was out of favor from before he passed away, which was in 1902, maybe the last decade of his life, really. And then for about 60 years, his work was stored, I guess, or maybe displayed, but it wasn't popular. Somebody wrote a dissertation about his work in 1960. And then another group, I can't remember whether this was the Brooklyn Museum, I know they did one later, did an exhibition of some of his work. And then somebody else did one. And so in a few years, there was a little resurgence of interest in his work. And then Gordon Hendricks did this marvelous book called Albert Bierstadt, Painter of the American West. This was in the early 70s. Which sort of told his narrative story, plus shows a lot of the paintings. And then there was just another book, and finally museums realized, wow, we've got these great history objects of what the West in America looked like in the mid-1800s, and that's worth preserving. And I would say probably at the same time, we're talking about the 60s and 70s, this resurgence of interest in nature, the rise of the repopularity of poetry by Whitman, and then you have people like Gary Snyder and others that are writing nature poetry and believing in that experience yet once again. And his connection to the images of the national parks, somewhat related to the founding of the national parks, has kept interest going. And now his work is one of the most valuable whenever it appears on auction of any artist, current of any American artist.
So one of the things that is, this is indicative of good poetry to me, is that you captured the most personal, visceral experience that Albert's having, or that the various characters are having, in the context of something that's enormous and sweeping, which is very representative of his art in general. You mind if I read a couple lines from the book, and I'd love for you to read a couple poems if you would like.
Absolutely.
So this is one of the many good examples of what I just said. Everything in me is tingling now. My hands are forks of Kansas lightning. My brush galvanized with the power to suspend antelope in swift chase, hold deer wary to a storm's menace. I gather encampments of teepees along the Wind River and ground them against the backdrop range. Each day is a race with dwindling light. I may run out of millboard and oils, but not scenes. Gorgeous.
Appreciate that.
So when you were composing a lot of this, I like that I can't really tell what's source material and what is your sort of imagination at work.
Well, good. By the time I was writing that poem, I had looked at many, many, many paintings. So I had sort of an idea of what he's seeing when, as he crosses the West. And he didn't write a whole lot about his experiences, so most of it just comes from the extant paintings. So I can see those. But part of it is just imagining what it must have been like to see this, unreckoned country for the first time for him. It's certainly not unsettled or anything like that, not implying that, but, his experience with it is brand new. And he had seen the Alps, and these mountains made greater impression on him than the Alps. So just trying to imagine the sheer rush of seeing mountains like that, the majesty, and knowing that, hey, I'm one of the first people to really have an opportunity to bring this back to the East, and there's money and recognition in doing so. Because he's painting before the real advent of photography, which is, a decade or 15 years later. And there weren't that many early painters out there, had been out there. It was George Catlin and some others, but the real majestic scenes of the era belonged to Frederick Church, who liked painting Central America and South America. So he left the West open to Bierstadt.
All right, you want to read a couple poems?
Sure. Did you have any one in particular in mind?
I don't.
Well, let me follow up with one that, since you brought this up, of what it's like to see these paintings, or to see this country the first time.
Okay.
This one's called First View, Chicago Lakes. After he had made his first trip back, he became famous rather quickly. And so by 1863, when he got invited to go back to the West, people wanted him, well, come paint our part, come paint this part. And so he got invited by the editor of the Rocky Mountain News in Colorado to come paint that part of the Rockies. Because where he'd gone before was kind of up further north, up in Wyoming, Green River and Wind River area. So this kind of captures what I felt it might be like for him to see a territory that he had not seen before that was valuable to somebody else. First View, Chicago Lakes. Sleet needles past my fastened collar as we rise into the house of rain. Mr. Byers of the Mountain News has horsed us up this fly-speck path with avowals of alpine views, but now is silent. I think he has missed the spur trail. My blood is gelid, fingers numb beyond recovery. Clouds tickle and drip, and when we crest this timbered ridge, I will ask that, oh, sublime cirque, The Alps surpassed again. Stay the mules. I need my paints. Stool. 15 minutes, please you. See how the near lake mirrors the breaking storm with light fine as milkweed fluff, and that one pearled peak soft as the edge of heaven.
Man, that's
and
lovely.
that actually references a painting that he did based on that experience. It's called Storm in the Rocky Mountains, Mount Rosalie. And some of the imagery of that painting is in this poem because it was there's simultaneous experiences.
That's lovely.
Thanks.
Like you really capture all of it, right down to like the flies. It's small and large at the same time.
Right. I can only imagine what it would be like to suddenly come upon a view
Oof.
of one of these magical Rockies experiences out of the clouds and out of the bad weather and thinking this guy's lost, And then all of a sudden there it is.
I think about that a lot, and just like the various journeys that would be required of that. Let me see. I've got maybe a let me look at one here that I would love to hear.
Sure.
In your
and
words.
We can go on a little longer if you want. That is fine.
Okay. Yeah.
This is going well. So.
Yeah, I'm having a blast, man. This is a lot of fun. What a great. Your choice on the second one.
Oh, okay.
Or you can read as many poems as you want. It's really nice to hear where you pause and which words you put emphasis on.
Well, thank you. I spent the first part of the book talking about his youth and childhood and his apprenticeship in Europe because I wanted to give some idea of what experience he, quote, rejected, which was the life of being a whaler or working in a whaling town to go pursue art. I mean, imagine telling your father that in like 1850 that I don't want to be a cooper, I don't want to be a whaler, I'm going to go pursue art, and go like, what? So he took a real risk, and then he was gone for a number of years. But there are several kind of loosely reported anecdotes of things that happened to him in Europe, usually not his recording, but people he was traveling with who took better notes or journals. This is one of these. It's a true story, though I've put it all in my own words, of course. He's traveling across Europe with his friend Worthington Whitridge, who's another American artist, a lot of famous works. Swiss afternoon. Sketch boxes set on a narrow slab, we dangle our boots over the blue of Lake Lucerne. This rock bridge is all that joins Brunnen to the high grazing, and quickened light requires we stop to paint glowing sails of homeward boats, the village spire white as a struck match, fence shadows slowly combing pastures. Whitridge, have you ever seen it so? But for answer, rock clattering, and then behind him, all bells and brambled wool, village goats, whose bridge we momently owned. The light, I say, as hill troughs darken and a distant window sparks. The goats will have to wait. We paint in a rush, a shaken bell, twice, and suddenly the lead goat leaps Whitridge, touches, then vaults me, a double flourish as deft as any living master's brushstroke. And now the air is full of flies and dust and dung smell, bell clappers and hoof clicks, as each goat follows the rump in front, scattering our rimmed twilight as they amble the grassy slope to Brunnen.
Oh, love that. I'm a big fan of your it reminds me of Joyce, your vocabulary use of these like neologisms, if I'm pronouncing that right. These words that don't exist but they should, and you make them very unique.
Thank you.
And that poem also goes perfectly with this. One of the questions I'm going to ask you is, how can poetry connect us to the natural world and to the social world.
Well, that's fabulous. Poetry has almost always been connected to the natural world, from all the way back to the poems of, Ovid and other writers and so forth. It's just one of the most common subjects in the world of poetry is nature, and it keeps us tied to or identified with the beauty. I mean, it's always a subject that's there for us. My first loves of poetry were reading Whitman, then reading Frost, and now I love people like Mary Oliver,
man,
and other great modern poets and so forth.
Mary Oliver just tears me up, man.
Oh, she's amazing. She's amazing.
Mary Oliver was at the front of my mind the whole time I was reading your book, too, by the way. It's funny that you would mention her because there are a lot of similarities there.
Well, I deeply appreciate that because she's certainly one of my idols and giants in mind. She's more concise than I am and probably more direct in her admissions and love of nature. I tried to do it subtly and so forth, and I'm using a different style of writing. But she's always in my mind. Yeah, I mean, if I can express something as clearly or as beautifully as her, then it's been a good day. But these poems are a narrative collection, so it's almost like a mini novel in a way that is trying to tell a whole story the way a longer work might.
There's definitely a differentiation. It was like what you're offering here is, I've spent a lot of time really trying to figure out where it is. I mean, there's a little bit of like Wallace Stevens there at times, like just the humor involved. There's some like William Carlos Williams there as well. But Mary Oliver was the one that I thought it captures this heart, this soul of nature, and that's where you two connect in my, which is probably that's probably the highest compliment you can get in the phrase you remind me of Mary Oliver.
Well, I appreciate that deeply. I will not consider myself on any kind of plane that she is on, but we may have a similar appreciation for the nature and the details in nature. And she lived in a very small world of lakes and ponds and trees right there, on her Cape Cod home and so forth. And this story is expansive. It goes from Europe to America, the plains, all the way to the Rockies and back. But there are moments where I'm trying to do those small details that show the sensitivity and appreciation of an artist. And this is one of the challenges that I felt that Bierstadt faced, and I even have a poem about that, that he looks at these great big scenes that are full of intimate details, but if you're going to do a landscape painting, it's hard to put all those things in there. Plus, it's hard to put the smells and the sounds of this landscape that you're painting, which is certainly part of your experience as the artist. So for everything that he's including, he's also having to leave stuff out, which is exactly what writing poetry is about.
Tell me a little bit more of that last part. That's nice.
The things that you're including, there are also things you must leave out.
Yeah.
Well, in the big picture of his story, I had to be selective because there's 70 years of work or life to choose from, and X number of. He has hundreds and hundreds of paintings. I think I reference 80 paintings in this book, not all by name, but by reference in terms of what the imagery does. There's so much to include that you have to just be particular in certain places, just give a hint or a breath of the imagery of the scene. One thing I tried to do in the whole scope of the book was to give a fair representation of what his career was like, which means we hear from his parents, we hear from his critics, we hear from his patrons, we hear from his wife, we hear from his best friend who felt betrayed when Bierstadt married that guy's wife. So you have some subplots that are going along in the story.
Juicy subplots.
Well, juicy subplot. And then, of course, he gets to speak, which you never see in any documentation or letters from him, his doubts and his wonders about, why are they criticizing me so, or what will be my legacy. Plus the pain of, his wife got tuberculosis and died, his grand mansion that he was able to build burned down. So all of these parts of the story are in the book or are in poems of their own. So it's certainly not meant to be a straight homage or anything like that. It's I hope, a balanced story of what his life and career were like.
It's funny that this is probably a weird comparison, but it reminds me of, in that aspect, it reminds me of Philip Roth's Everyman, where you sort of like, it's like, as the reader, you're looking at somebody's lifespan, and it's like you black out for years and then drop in for these very intense or very intimate or very like catastrophic moments.
Well, in any good book or novel or book of poetry, you're wanting to find the drama too. So I did pick deliberately things that were of high interest. You hardly ever write about only the good days, because the good days don't seem to have the kind of tension that you want. So the travels and the difficulty, the discoveries and the wonder, those are the peak moments. The harsh criticism, the tragedies along the way. But there are a number of places where I step back and just do a portrait of a painting, which is what we call an ekphrastic work, a verbal rendering of the artistic work, which isn't in his voice, and only in the sense that I'm writing it is it in my voice. It's just sort of trying to be a depiction of the painting. And they're in there as spacers, along the way as well, a little break from the narrative. Here's a painting. It's just like if you were in a museum and you step back and you look at the painting and appreciate it, but then you walk up and read the wall script beside it to get the story about the painting or the title of the painting or something like that. Then you step back and go, oh, now I have it in context. So there's some of that going.
Those parts reminded me of Ashbery and like his devotion to painters, and everything you were just saying I find so important and so impressive, because I think in a lot of recent poetry, we've sort of strayed into the abstract so far, which is important. You voyage through the abstract in the book. It's not like you're avoiding it, but you capture a physical reality that I think gets left out a lot, and I think the drama gets left out. Like I guess like a poem like W.S. Merwin's like Vixen, where you have the story of the fox and it provokes all these things. There is a concrete world taking place there, but there doesn't seem to be as much action as you capture.
Well, I appreciate that. You're dropping a lot of names that I don't claim any association or level with, but I appreciate that. But,
I feel like that's what I felt like reading it. I was like, and I had the same experience that I have with those writers, where I was like, I'll just kind of look through this, I'll pick it up, and I read it in one sitting. Of course, it was over the course of 3 or 4 hours.
Sure.
But it's that level of like, there's a serial element where you're like, well, I need to figure out what happens next.
Right. Well, I wanted it to be compelling and to move you from section to section. And is the next part success, or is the next part failure? Is the next part tragedy, or is the next part, a blessing? And so, like any good narrative, I hope like any good narrative, it moves back and forth in that way, that there's the successes and the challenges, all the time trying to keep in mind the craft of what I was working with, which is a pretty set poetic line for him, and then some variability and range for the others that are getting to speak.
So you also teach poetry. What's something universal about poetry that that everyone should know?
Wow. I'm retired from teaching now.
Gotcha.
I taught English, composition, literature, poetry, creative writing, and such for 40 years at Brevard College in North Carolina. Poetry is real. Poetry is the world that we know, and you can reflect the nature around you. You can reflect the relationships that you have. You can talk about what's going on in your own mind. So there's really a number of different, quote, settings that you might enjoy. One of the best things about poetry that I like and tried to teach students was its comparative value. The figure we talk about, the figure of speech, whether it's a simile or a metaphor or a personification, is it helps us to see the world in terms of something else. We can relate to this because of this. And we're always using that kind of analogic way of relating to things because it's how we learn not to touch the hot thing the second time. Well, I did this, well, I'm not doing that. So almost all experience ends up being comparative. You taste this food, you like it, or you don't like it. You want it again, or you don't want it again. So the images of this is like that, or this is similar, the way that we set up similes and metaphors is extremely important to expanding our understanding of the world and expanding our relationship.
So this will be the last question I have, unless there's anything else I need to ask, and this will be my last name drop, I promise. But there is very much an element of the story that reminds me of is it Victor Hugo, Triggering Town?
Richard Hugo.
Richard Hugo. Sorry, Victor Hugo is somebody else.
Name is Rock.
What advice do you have for people who want to write poetry, or with Hugo's idea that you start with the town that you is in your mind or you haven't been to, or someplace you have been to? Do you have something like that will help people sort of launch off into writing poetry?
Hugo's advice was that you have to get rid of the town you were born in to be able to go past that and write other things. But that's a perspective of which, if you've had a troubled childhood or a troubled adolescence, or you felt like your training was strictly too indoctrinated, too strict, in religion or in politics or something, that you have to move past that. There's a truth in that we each have to become our own persons, and so we're not writing like our parents would have written, or we're not writing like even the masters that you've mentioned many times. We usually start out in imitation, but we have to move past that in imitation. The best advice I have for young writers and creative writers is pay attention. Just be observant. Take notes. All of these details are what makes poetry good. You can't write in sentences of abstraction or long, broad coverages. You deal with the details, and the details are what reveal the emotion. So start keeping a journal, start making notes, use an artist's sketchbook. And those things are what become valuable. That's why I went to the museums, to see the details in the paintings that the little pictures wouldn't reveal to me. And then I was able to use many of those in the poems. This is Mary Oliver's advice too. This is everybody's advice. Pay attention. Watch the world around you.
I love that. I love that. That's fantastic. Is there anything else that I didn't ask that I should have asked?
In the recent pandemic, 2020 and following, there was a real additional surge in interest in Bierstadt's work, because once we were over the initial hammering of stay home and wear your mask and so forth, then people want to get out. And so they wanted to go back out into nature. And so almost everything that was related to re-accepting or revisiting our natural world, national parks, national forests, and so forth, became valuable again. And so the scenes that Bierstadt paints, the Rockies, Yosemite, some of the Great Plains, became valuable as a way of looking at our wonderful natural resources, the things we were kept away from sort of temporarily, with having to, hunker down and be safe. And so I just love the fact that his work is gaining popularity again. It was there was a wonderful new exhibition and catalog of his work in 2018, which is right before the pandemic started, in Cody, Wyoming. Another one in Newark at the Newark Museum, and all those just seem to me to be prescient of the fact that, wow, here he's going to come around again. Here it is. And I see articles about Bierstadt. I see people writing, tributes to certain paintings of his, every week. And all the museums that hold his work usually hold them in very high esteem and have prominent places. Not only because they're big, but also because they're so wonderfully representative of a particular time.
So the best material for the artist in the world, Albert Bierstadt, a biography and poems. I cannot recommend it highly enough.
Thank you.
People can find it on Amazon. They can find it on your website.
Right?
And
Go to your local bookstore. Try your local bookstore and ask them to order it, or you can get it through Goodreads or bookshops or something like that.
I like the local bookstore element.
I like that.
I think that's my favorite. My favorite way to get it.
And I should plug my publisher, the Stephen F. Austin State University Press in Texas. They're the ones that accepted and published it, and you can order it directly through them from my website. But I was really pleased that a university press is the one that wanted this book, and that university is a good liberal arts university. Not huge. It's part of the Texas A&M system, but they've got a good standing and a good reputation, and they produced a beautiful book.
Where else is there something we can look out for? Do you have to keep it under wraps coming up in the future?
Nothing I'm willing to divulge at this point.
Gotcha.
Don't spoil projects when they're just in the burner stage.
I hear you.
Thank you for asking. Yeah,
you bet. Ken, it's been a real joy talking to you.
I appreciate it, Kevin. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate the connection through the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum, too. That was a wonderful experience, and I appreciate them so much for having me out for the